We have a lot to cover in today's video, including the latest trade talk around the league. We're looking at the potential Montreal-Minnesota trade. There's some rumors speculating there on potential goaltending trade. Plus, could we see Marc-Andre Fleury end up in Montreal as part of that or to finish off his career? We'll discuss that crazy rumor that's going around. Plus, we have some updates as well and some trade talk around the Washington Capitals, the Colorado Avalanche, and the Calgary Flames. Could Gabriel Landeskog make a return for the Avs this year? We'll discuss that possibility. Ryan Hartman of Minnesota has been fined by player safety. We have a big update as well regarding the Maple Leafs and the William Nylander contract extension talks, and big news from the World Junior Championships. All that and more coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a lot of news to cover here today. Let's kick things off with the latest updates and news from the 2024 World Junior Championships. Today was the quarterfinal day. We had 4 matchups, and we saw a couple of upsets, including Team Canada getting defeated this morning by Team Czechia, and they are out. So the back-to-back gold medalists will not be able to defend that gold medal, and their tournament is over. They didn't have a great start. Czechia had a 2-goal lead in the first period. Canada did come back and get things tied up 2-2. They had a much better second period, but the third period was pretty, I don't know if I'd say it was pretty evenly played, but Canada certainly had their moments. Lots of pressure, couldn't bury a goal. Czechia was hanging on, kind of hanging around, and then with, I think there was, 11 or 12 seconds left, they got an extremely favorable bounce. Czechia took a shot towards the Canada goal. It hit a defenseman, which I think was Oliver Bonk. It hit his stick, deflected off of him, hit the post, and went in. The goaltender didn't have any chance because it changed completely directions. Like, it was really off. It's just a really wonky bounce. No fault to Matisse Rousseau. And Canada's out just like that. Is one of those things that, to be honest, it was, you could argue that it was a bad bounce and that, maybe they deserve better. But, it's also, you can make an argument like Team Canada put themselves in that predicament. To be honest, we know that they were missing players that they did not get from the NHL. They're not the only team in that predicament. But, they weren't expecting Connor Bedard and Adam Fantilli, although that would have been awesome if they could have got those guys. But they were expecting guys like Kevin Korchinski and Zach Benson. However, the Team Canada brain trust who constructed this roster certainly left off some players that are very, very offensively capable. I don't know that they put together the best possible roster. I do have to question some decisions in that regard. But this team clearly didn't have the it factor. And coming into the tournament, when I did the preview and kind of made some predictions, I said Team Canada will be good. I don't think they can win gold for a third straight tournament. I said that I suspected they might be able to make it to the gold medal game, but otherwise I'd say most likely I kind of thought maybe they'd make it as far as the semifinals, and then that would be where they'd run into either Sweden or the U.S. and probably lose. And they didn't even make it that far. So they were, not as strong as even I was hoping, and I knew they weren't going to be as good enough as to win gold. So it's unfortunate, but they did work hard. But like I said, it just wasn't in the mix this year. The team was gripping the sticks too tight. I don't think they were able to handle the pressure, and they just couldn't get the job done. So hats off to Czechia. They deserved to win, and I knew when that matchup was set that Czechia would be one of the teams who could pull that off. I mean, they'd never beaten Canada in a elimination game at this tournament before, but they've had some really tough matchups, and they're always close. And just the way Canada's been playing, this was not a surprise to me at all. Finland also upset Slovakia this morning in overtime, 4-3 win. Finland actually had a lead going into late into the third period. Filip Mesar of Slovakia, the Habs prospect, scored in the final minute to tie things up. Sent into overtime, but Finland wasted no time. Took 24 seconds of overtime, and it was over. Finland upsets the Slovaks, who were the higher-ranked team here going into this game, and moves on to the semifinals. The USA took care of business, 7-2 victories over Latvia. No big surprise there. Perreault, McGroarty, Smith, a lot of guys had good games, racked up some points, and the outcome is pretty much what you'd expect. The Sweden-Switzerland game was, I would say, a little bit controversial. Sweden takes the game 3-2 in overtime. The referees in that game were completely out to lunch, in my opinion. Some really weird calls late in the third. Switzerland was given a penalty. It was originally called a major for spearing, and all it was the puck came down to the Switzerland net, and then as the Swedish player kind of, stopped after the whistle, sometimes you get a little bit of rough stop, he just kind of shoved the player, like it wasn't even a poke. And the referee was standing right there, put his hand up, called it a 5-minute major for spearing. They reviewed it, knocked it down to 2 minutes. I'm like, it shouldn't even be 2 minutes. Like, that was insane. So the Swiss team had to fight off that penalty, which carried over to overtime. Just absolutely nuts. And then in overtime, they did get another penalty, which that one I can see. That was a legit penalty. But the problem I had was that they are pretty strict about players being in the crease, and there was a Swedish player in front of the goalie, which is screening, which is fine. There was no goaltender interference per se, but you could watch the review. It looks like his skates were in the crease, and they didn't even review that. Now, apparently you can't challenge in overtime. I don't know. I just didn't care for the officiating in that game. I thought there was kind of some questionable calls and just completely out to lunch, but Sweden was the favorite. They did get the job done. So now, not tomorrow, but the next day, the semifinals are going to be the U.S. will play Finland and Sweden will play Czechia. I suspect we're likely going to get a U.S.-Sweden final, but that's not guaranteed. Finland and Czechia already playing the role of upsetter today. They could do it again. They're strong enough that you can't look past them, and we'll have a very competitive group of semifinal games here. So we'll be curious to see how things play out. And of course, you have Norway and Germany playing in the relegation game. One game and you're out, unfortunately. So not good news on that front. So that's your latest updates from the World Junior Championships. The Minnesota Wild and their forward Ryan Hartman, he's been fined for high sticking. Of course, the Wild and the Winnipeg Jets have played home and home series here recently, back-to-back games. And in the first game, the few Wild players were injured, including Kirill Kaprizov and goaltender Philip Gustafsson. And the Jets were, I guess, had to pay the price, so to speak. The Wild were coming after them for the Kaprizov injury especially. And Cole Perfetti of the Winnipeg Jets was mic'd up for that game, the second game. And Ryan Hartman told him that he high-sticked him intentionally. And he said that because somebody had to pay the price for the Kaprizov injury. I mean, Cole Perfetti had absolutely nothing to do with it. I don't understand why he'd go after a player like him. Obviously he fully admit to it, which he might not have realized that Perfetti was mic'd up. But one thing that comes with the agreement with the players to be mic'd up for games is that the audio that's picked up on them cannot be used against them. So essentially, if you think about it, when they deal with NHL player safety, it's kind of like almost going to court, and you can't submit that as evidence. So even though Ryan Hartman is on the audio admitting that he did it intentionally, they can't use it. So it's just a fine for Hartman. I don't understand. I mean, it looks bad. I mean, I understand they felt the need that somebody had to kind of pay the price for the injury, but go after a player who's, a little bit more, physical. Like, don't go after a kid like Perfetti. To me, that's kind of stupid in my opinion. But at the end of the day, to me, it's just a bad look. I understand they're upset about the injuries, but go about things in a better way. I mean, challenge one of their more physical guys for a fight, or maybe have something to do with the player who caused the injury. How about that? Anyway, it's just kind of an interesting scenario there, but I'd like to see what everybody thinks about the Wild centerman Ryan Hartman admitting on the hot mic that he did it on purpose. I know Wild fans probably won't care, but what other fans have to say about that, I'll be curious to see. There's also some cautious optimism, you could say, with the Colorado Avalanche organization that Gabriel Landeskog might actually be able to come back this year. Now, if he does, it's more than likely not going to happen until the playoffs. Obviously, he sat out all of last year. He sat out all this year so far. The last time we see Gabe Landeskog on the ice is when they won the Stanley Cup, and he was the captain of the Stanley Cup champions, hoisting the cup. He has not been on the ice since. Obviously, he was battling a knee injury, needed surgery, and it's been out for a long time. I think he's had multiple procedures, if I'm not mistaken, and going through extensive rehab. But a couple of good news stories lately. He's because for a while there he was completely away from the team, but he's made his way back to Denver. He's been around the team more, and he, I guess, with the information they have and what he's been able to do around them, that they're, like I said, they're cautiously optimistic that if things progress the way they're hoping, that come playoffs, he'll be available to play. Now, the good news for the Avalanche is in the playoffs, there's no salary cap. Obviously, to activate him would be very complicated cap-wise during the regular season. So we'll see. But that would be such a big boost. Now, he hasn't played in a long time. It's hard to say how everything would go for him. I mean, it takes a while. I mean, you can't duplicate game action. No matter how long he's been skating and practicing with the team, it's not the same. So it's still a good moral boost no matter what, just having him there. And if he's suited up and he's in the lineup, he's such a good leader for them that it could be a big boost come playoff time. Now, the Avalanche, according to Chris Johnston, are also the most likely destination, in his opinion, for landing Elias Lindholm out of Calgary. Now, like I said before, I wondered when I first heard that news about Landeskog is, would that impact any of their other moves that they're looking at? And the answer is probably no, because at this point, it's believed that if Landeskog comes back, he wouldn't come back until the playoffs. He probably is going to be needing that time anyways. I mean, at this point, like you said, it's nowhere close yet. He still needs several months of rehab and, whatnot to be possibly ready to play. So we'll have to see where that goes. But obviously, with Elias Lindholm being definitely one of the top players available in the trade market, if not probably the top two-way forward. Arguably, it would be the type of exact player that the Avalanche need. There is some speculation they may want to add some depth in the blue line as well. But another scoring forward up front to bolster their top six would be preferred. And if they can get a centerman like Lindholm who can play such a strong two-way game, that would really go a long way to making them a much stronger team in the playoffs. You take this Avalanche team now, if you trade for Lindholm and you get Landeskog back in the playoffs, that's an absolutely huge boost. Now, according to Chris Johnston, he thinks that the Calgary Flames, if they talk to the Avalanche about a Lindholm trade, that they're going to want young defenseman Bo Byram. And he wonders if the Avalanche would do it. I personally don't think they would. I do wonder about Sam Girard. I know he's had a tough time off the ice this year and gone through a lot, but he's back. And, hopefully if all goes well, maybe I'm not sure how things are, with everything right now. They seem to be better. But I know there's been a lot of talk about Girard's future with the Avalanche for a long time. I personally think with Girard being a little older, and Bo Byram's upside, I think long-term might be a little higher, that they probably would prefer that. Either way, if Calgary can get a fairly young, strong, puck-moving defenseman that's a good skater like that, I think that would be an absolute win if they traded Lindholm and get that type of return. Now, to be honest, because we know Noah Hanifin isn't sticking around, he's likely getting dealt before the deadline as well. At least in this type of trade, they might be able to get that same type of player for a good replacement. A little younger, maybe a good contract. Like Girard's got a pretty steady contract too. So, we'll see. I don't know that the Avalanche would want to give up Byram as much as they'd love to have Lindholm, but that's what CJ thinks it might take to get the job done. So we'll have to wait and see where things go on that front. Now, we also got word today from Nick Kypreos of Sportsnet that he has sources indicating that the Maple Leafs and William Nylander appear to be getting closer on a contract extension. Now, according to Kypreos, the Leafs and Nylander's camp would like to have this done ahead of the All-Star game. So probably sometime within the next 30 days, ideally. Maybe where the All-Star game's in Toronto, maybe they'll announce it sometime around there or right before. Hard to say. I mean, probably fair to say Nylander will be a part of the All-Star festivities because he's having a phenomenal year right now in top 5 or 6 in scoring in the NHL. But according to Kypreos, the expected contract will be somewhere around $11.25 million, somewhere around the David Pastrnak contract over an 8-year time frame. Now, of course, it's likely going to be front-loaded with heavy bonuses like they all get in Toronto. Obviously, a situation where he'll probably get a lot of trade protection, if not full trade protection as well. But I would expect that it will be so front loaded that even after year 4 or 5, the last probably 3 years, there won't be a ton of money left owing on it. So if things for whatever reason don't work out, it shouldn't be that big a deal to either trade or to buy out or what have you. Now, I don't expect that to happen. Nylander's a type of player who's, so far at least in his career, has been able to stay healthy. The way he plays, I suspect he's likely going to be able to have a fairly lengthy career. I think an 8-year deal at his current age will be fine. Like, he should be able to be a productive player through all or majority of that time frame, I would suspect. But there's no doubt that Nylander has earned a bigger raise than a lot of people expected in the offseason. There was rumors in the offseason they were trying to get him to sign for 9 or less, and that's certainly not happening now. And obviously 11.25 is a lot of money, but I think based on how he's performed, that it's earned and justifiable based on comparables around the NHL. So we'll have to keep an eye on the situation, but it does appear that the Leafs and Nylander are getting close, which is good news for Leaf fans. I'm sure they love to see Willie stick around. But as I've said before, you add another player in the mix, that'll be 4 players, over that $10, $11 million mark. That's a lot of cap space eaten up. Yes, the cap's going up around $4 to $4.5 million next year, but that's a big raise for Willie. That's going to be, all of that cap increase is going to be going to him, if not all and more. So the supporting cast will once again likely have to be trimmed, and it's going to be challenging to keep the team, I think, in cup contending mode with the amount of changes they'll have to make. But we'll see. He's a great player. I understand why they don't want to lose him. It's going to be challenging and tricky, at least for a short term until the Tavares contract is up. Be curious to see how they handle that contract renewal and if they'll want to keep Tavares in the mix. Will he re-sign for less money? How is that all going to play out? Will he pull a Claude Giroux and maybe sign for under market value to stay with his hometown team, try to win a Stanley Cup? Be curious to see how that works out, but at least the latest reports indicate the Leafs and Nylander are certainly getting close. With Washington, some speculation about the future of Evgeny Kuznetsov. Hockey News writer, beat writer for the Capitals, Sammy Silver, has mentioned lately that trade talks have certainly picked up, and the rumors have been flying around regarding the future of Kuzmenko with the Capitals organization. Obviously, we've seen some changing into the lines here lately. I believe Kuzmenko's back playing with Ovi and Tom Wilson, trying to get some things going. Spencer Carberry's tried his best to get the centerman motivated and more productive this year. It's been a difficult year for sure in that sense. Inconsistency, which has been the battle of his career for the past 2-3 seasons. Obviously, he's got one more year left, and with the cap going up, the belief, though, is that even though there's been a lot of talk around him, that a trade is more likely in the offseason than it is anytime now before the deadline. Because in the offseason, to be down to 1 year. And if a trade doesn't work out, I think they would consider a buyout. I really do think they will look at that. But if they can trade him, even if they had to retain a little bit of money for next year, that would be preferable. Now, there was almost a trade involving Evgeny Kuznetsov last offseason. There was a reported deal that was, I wouldn't say it was done, obviously didn't happen, but it was really close to being done with the Nashville Predators. I mean, obviously, former head coach of Washington, Barry Trotz, is the GM there now, very familiar with Capitals players. Probably thought he would take Kuznetsov on a redemption tour, see if he can get him going. Obviously, they were looking to shake up their top 6 as well. They wanted to move on from Ryan Johansson and Matt Duchene. They were able to do that. They traded Johansson to the Avalanche, and then they ended up buying out Duchene. And I think that buyout is probably what killed the trade involving Kuznetsov, because I do believe, from what I'd heard before, that Duchene was the likely player going back to the Capitals. But they ended up doing the buyout. The trade never happened, and here we are. So Kuznetsov, unfortunately, like I said, has struggled to find consistency since. We'll see if getting back in that groove, maybe with Ovi and Wilson, will help. But it's probably his last year in Washington. Now that he's down to 1 year, they'll have options in this offseason. They'll likely be able to move on. And will we see a trade involving Minnesota and Montreal? There's some speculation from TVA Sports that with the injury to Philip Gustafsson in Minnesota, that they will have interest in veteran goaltender Jake Allen in Montreal. Now, Jake Allen is one of the goalies getting tons of play in the rumor mill regarding pretty much every team out there that's rumored to be looking for goaltending help. has had interest in him. And really, if you think about it, he's, in his early 30s. He's a veteran goaltender. He has one more year in his contract. He's got a Stanley Cup on his resume. Pretty solid career overall. Why wouldn't they have interest? Of course, Montreal's got their price. They don't want to deviate from that too much. And the thing is, too, is that they don't need a goaltender in return. They have Montembeault and Primo. Because I've seen some talking about Allen for Fleury. And I'm sorry, that deal makes absolutely no sense. Why would Minnesota, who has Philip Gustafsson injured right now, and they have Fleury as their main goaltender, if they bring in Jake Allen, it would be to help Fleury. It wouldn't be to trade Fleury. Now, if they bring in Jake Allen, who has term on his contract, Fleury does not. Fleury obviously is in his final season with that contract, possibly the final season of his career. I guess if Minnesota right now, who are out of the playoffs currently, if they don't climb back in and they become sellers a little bit later, would we see Montreal and Minnesota hook up to bring in Allen now for help while Gustafsson's out? And then closer to the deadline, when he's back, maybe they move Fleury to a contending team to have one last shot at a Stanley Cup. I'm sorry, to go to Montreal makes absolutely no sense. Now, if he wanted to go to Montreal to finish his career in his home province, that's something they might be able to discuss as a free agent next offseason. But not now. That makes no sense now. Why would Montreal want to move a goaltender and bring in another goaltender when they already have 3 and they want to go down to 2? It makes no sense. And why would Minnesota want to trade their main goaltender when their other starting goaltender's hurt? I'm not sure where those rumors came from, but I've seen them on social media, and it just seemed a little crazy. Now, I can understand the TVA Sports report saying that with the Gustafsson injury, Minnesota reportedly has interest in Jake Allen. Okay, that makes sense. Now, Gustafsson's expected to be out at least 2 weeks. It's probably going to be 3 or 4. They're at a point that's pretty critical in the season, and if they don't get things going soon, the playoffs are not going to be a possibility this year. They're far enough out that it's going to be tough as it is, and if they have a bad string here in a couple of weeks, that could be a make or break point of the year. So I get it. I understand why they would want help, and I understand why and how they can make that happen. I just don't think Fleury would be involved. But like I said, the only thing that makes sense to me is that if Allen were traded to Minnesota now, that Fleury could be moved at a later date, and maybe he goes somewhere else on a contending team, not Montreal. Will he ever play in Montreal? I don't know. If he plays beyond this year, maybe. But a lot of people think this is the kind of final, tour of Fleury around the NHL, and he's likely going to retire, but you just never know. He's still playing decently. He still loves the game. Hard to say if he'll retire or not. And what he does in the offseason as a free agent, completely different story, hard to say. But let me know your thoughts on today's news and rumors down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.